Have you ever watched something as a kid that's supposed to represent you, but instead reinforces negative stereotypes about you and your culture that leads to real-life bullying and harassment? And were one of those examples ever on Disney Channel? Yes, no, maybe. Well, either way, today we're talking about it. Today we're going to be analyzing characters from Disney shows and movies from the early 2000s in order to talk more deeply about children and preteen media trends of that era, like colorblind casting, the subsequent racial shift in representation in 2005, Orientalism, adoption, and of course everybody's favorite topic, I'm not like other girls, right here on Disney Channel. Before we start, I should mention that Disney Channel in the early 2000s is a huge topic, so I'll only be mentioning shows and movies that I actually have thoughts on, and there will be a heavier focus on Asian American characters, specifically East Asian American characters, though we'll be talking about South and Southeast Asian characters as well, and let me know what your favorite Disney Channel original movie or DCOM was in the comments down below. So without further ado, let's get started. So let's start off with one of the first cartoons that debuted right in the beginning of Y2K that I'm sure at least some of you have heard of, The Proud Family. So The Proud Family debuted on Disney Channel on September 15, 2001 and aired until August 19, 2005 and was created by Bruce W. Smith. It ran for 52 episodes and had a movie simply entitled The Proud Family Movie. The show revolved around the titular African American family, but primarily focused on 14-year-old Penny, voiced by Kyla Pratt, amazing voice actress by the way, the oldest daughter of Mom Trudy, a veterinarian, and overprotective father, Oscar, a snack entrepreneur. Penny navigates high school with her group of friends, Dijonay, La Cienega, and Zoe. The show is often seen as important for its representation of Black families during the early 2000s and hailed as ahead of its time, as they tackle subjects like homophobia, gender stereotypes, as well as racism and xenophobia. For example, in one episode entitled Culture Shock, which aired 3 years after 9/11 on October 24, 2004, Penny and her friends switch households for a week with their classmates in order to see how their peers live as part of Diversity Week at school. Penny switches houses with Radhika Zamin. The Zamins are a Pakistani Muslim family, and Penny is initially very hesitant about them because she sees them as weird and different, which is extremely realistic coming from a child. The show doesn't shy away from how strange kids find their fellow classmates and families, and I think that's a good thing. We shouldn't act as if discrimination doesn't exist. A lot of the language that's used in the episode is language that I think most kids and adults are familiar with, and therefore the people watching at the time could more easily see themselves and their own biases that they might have about those people.
We don't know anything about those people that they have us staying with.
Penny moves in with the Zamins and learns that they're celebrating Ramadan, or the 9th month of the Islamic calendar, which is observed by Muslims as a time for reflection, prayer, and community, and in which able-bodied adults and older children fast from dawn to dusk and then celebrate the end of the month with a breaking of the fast, or Eid al-Fitr. Penny finds this to be ridiculous, and she also finds all of the members of Radhika's family weird. The dad's too strict, the mom smiles too much, and the grandparents and kids just watch soap operas all day in Urdu. Penny is even given a hijab to wear by Radhika's mother, who says that it's her choice to wear it, and she chooses to wear it because she would rather be judged for who she is and not what she looks like, and that it comes in handy when you're having a bad hair day.
A huwa? A hijab. It's a traditional headdress. All Pakistani women and girls wear them. I'm supposed to wear this on my head? Only if you want. I wear mine because I would rather be judged for who I am, not necessarily how I look. Besides, it's the perfect thing to wear when you're having a bad hair day.
Radhika finds the Proud family different from her own as well, but in a more positive and fun way, as she doesn't have to cook dinner while she's at Penny's house and can shop with Penny's mom and grandmother. It would have been cool to see a dialogue between the two of them, but they don't really talk to one another. At school, Penny is made fun of for wearing a hijab, but then tries to educate her friends about it. She then is about to break her fast, but Mr. Webb helps Penny learn to appreciate the Zamins and talks about how important Ramadan is to Radhika's family. As the week goes on, Penny warms up to the Zamins and they celebrate the end of their fast at Eid al-Fitr, but on the way home we see that the Zamins' house has been vandalized with the words, "Go back to your country." Penny then gives an impassioned speech at her school saying that, "Before I moved in with the Zamins, I thought like a lot of you guys. They're weird, they're different, they're not like us. And I was right. And the more I got to know them, the stranger they became. And before I knew it, they were exactly like my family. Truly bizarre. But they're exactly like all of our families. Little brothers and sisters that get on your nerves, a father that's too protective, a grandparent that sleeps in front of the TV, and a mom that keeps everything together. And if you know that, you can never write on their door, 'Go back to your country, America for Americans.' You just couldn't do it." Acknowledging that the Zamins are different, but that doesn't mean that they should be treated worse because of it, or that they're not American. Layla Etakfini, who wrote an article for Vice about how this episode originally made her feel seen as a child, especially after the rise of Islamophobia in the early 2000s, said that after revisiting the episode over a decade later, that it made her feel uncomfortable because it relied too much on stereotypes. They write, "In one scene, Penny is complaining to her friends about her new family. The Zamins are plain weird, she says. The daddy never smiles, the mama doesn't do anything but smile, and so all day, and everybody else just sits around the TV and watches soap operas and cricket matches broadcast in Urdu." Ironically, I remember excitedly asking my friends if they'd seen the episode, hoping they would think I was a little less weird, or that, at the very least, my explanations of Ramadan would be met with less concerned reactions than, "Your family starves for a month?" Rather than breaking down stereotypes, a lot of the talk in the episode seemed to reinforce them, as far as kids' reactions went in the early 2000s. And either surprisingly or unsurprisingly, this will become a pattern in the video. When reading people's testimonies after almost 2 decades later, it seems that misunderstanding or bullying due to representation on Disney Channel ironically increases rather than decreases. Obviously, it's not up to a single TV show episode to change the world, but I do think it's kind of sad to think about how kids were actually bullied more for having their cultures exposed and represented on Disney Channel, and how mean-spirited children ironically use the knowledge that they gained from those episodes in order to have more ammunition to add fuel to the fire. In the end, however, Layla Etakfini is still happy the episode existed, writing, "Despite its deep flaws, I'm still happy the episode exists." And I think that's how most people feel when looking back at almost a 20-year show, or a 20-year show. I think the message of the show really rang true back then and still rings true today. We learned that diversity is more than just experiencing someone else's culture in like a homestay exchange, but actually standing up when injustices happen to those people in those communities. But I think at the time, a lot of this stuff just went over most kids' heads, which is a shame because out of all the representation we're going to talk about today, the Proud Family takes one of, if not the boldest stance. The episode, again, gives people mixed feelings today, but generally I think people are happy that it existed when it did, and of course it had good intentions. And I think that can be said for the entire show in general. Saying X doesn't hold up today is really nitpicky in my opinion, because no, I'm not bringing up this episode or these shows or movies to dunk on them. Rather, I think it's important to look back on where we were to see where we are today. And I think that we should continue to demand better media and more media with Muslim and South Asian people. At the end of Layla Etakfini's article, they quote Dave Schilling's 2016 Guardian article, where they wrote, "Where is the Muslim Modern Family, or Family Matters, or Fresh Off the Boat? When will there be one show in the vast array of broadcast, cable, and streaming programming that's willing and able to portray Muslim characters as normal people and not spies or extremists?" And I, of course, wholeheartedly agree with this statement. There should be not just one, but many Muslim American family shows on TV, and there should be more realistic representations of Muslim Americans, period. But you should have left Fresh Off the Boat out of it. And I know I'm overreacting and this isn't made to be like an attack on the author. I 100% agree. And I know he only brought up the other TV shows in order to, compare where other minorities are to where Muslim Americans are. But honestly, I really cannot stand when people make these sorts of comparisons. There's a weird thing that happens in minority communities where some people try to compare representation gains or struggles, or one group says that this other group has too much, or when are we going to get ours? And it's like, please don't do that. Why get mad at another minority community for having our one freaking show that only came out a year before this article was published? I get that it's an appealing argument like, well, black families have this, Asian families have this, gay families have this, but it plays into such a dangerous game that not many people realize. And I personally make a conscious effort not to play into this because, in my opinion, this argument is so reductive and ignores all of the struggles that those communities had to go through in order to get their one thing. There's nothing white people love more than seeing racial minorities in particular fight amongst each other because it keeps us battling for our one freaking show or our one freaking movie without getting mad at them for literally having everything else. Stop comparing different community struggles because they're not comparable. Stop using our one show as a prop for your own cause because that's freaking annoying. And again, just to reiterate, before we move on, I'm not singularly mad at this one person for an article that they wrote 5 years ago, and I don't think that their intent was to be offensive. I just think that it's highly questionable when someone frames X, Y, or Z minority groups' gains in representation as if they're somehow hurting another minority group because it distracts from who's really in power and who's really overrepresented. Hint, it's not us. Before we move on from the Proud family, I think we should talk about the Chang triplets and Mr. Chang. Billy, Debbie, and Julie Chang are fraternal Chinese-American triplets shown throughout the Proud Family TV series. They're being raised by their strict Chinese father, Mr. Chang, who has them taking calculus at 14 and is generally just pretty hard on them. Though they're academically smart, they also have other talents like dancing and martial arts. Overall, I think it was cool that they were included and that so many different racial minorities were on the show in general. Their voice casting is also interesting. Mr. Chang is voiced by Phil Lamar, who's also known for voicing Samurai Jack and a whole host of other beloved animated characters, including Will from Foster's Home of Imaginary Friends. So, without further ado, let's get into voice acting. Again! So I made a video last year talking about why it's problematic when Asian and Asian American characters are voiced by white people, and some people go to that video just to make comments about Phil Lamar, saying that you should be angry at Phil Lamar too, or what do you think about Phil Lamar, and it's like, they comment as if a black voice actor voicing an Asian character is the same thing as a white person voicing an Asian character, when they're not the same at all. So, no random person on the internet, I personally don't care that Phil Lamar did those voices. And he even addressed this on Twitter, saying that him voicing minorities as a black man is not the same thing as white actors voicing racial minorities. When it comes to Samurai Jack or Mr. Chang, Lamar said that it's a question of authenticity rather than systemic racism. And honestly, I do kind of agree with that. It's my opinion! There is a lack of authenticity, as Phil Lamar says, when it comes to Chang's voice or Samurai Jack's voice, especially since Mr. Chang speaks with a heavy accent in the show.
I said calculus, not calluses!
And the triplets, though all voiced by the same person, are still voiced by an Asian voice actor, Lydia Look. What happened behind the scenes? Why couldn't they also cast an Asian actor to voice the dad? I'll never know, but I do think that it's really terrible that some people accuse him of stealing from Asian voice actors, or that he's just as bad as white people. Like, some people of color would rather attack people from other racially marginalized communities than use that energy and anger and direct it at white people. In all, I think that Phil Lamar definitely receives a lot more backlash than white voice actors do for doing the same freaking thing. In this case, voicing Asian characters, just because he's black, and that's freaking annoying. Of course, it would have been better if the voices of Samurai Jack or Mr. Chang went to Asian American or Asian voice actors, but them being voiced by a member of another racialized community is not the same thing as being voiced by a white actor, and if you cannot see the difference, I don't even know what to tell you. Why are you even watching this video? Honestly. In the end, I think the problem of staying true to the race or ethnicity of a character falls on the casting people and the real people with power behind the production and not the individual voice actors. But in the case of white voice actors, step the F down. One thing that does truly bother me though is the Chang triplets. So let's talk about character designing and designing characters of color. I personally cannot stand that they're basically identical triplets as far as looks go. There's already a very pervasive stereotype that all Asian people look the same, and having them be carbon copies of one another is like one of the worst options that they could have gone for as far as character designing. Though I could see them all looking the same, but also having like distinct personalities be an attempt at trying to subvert that stereotype, but I don't know, to me it's still annoying. Secondly, they all have buck teeth, and honestly it makes me kind of uncomfortable, as buck teeth is another common stereotype that Asian people face. And the Proud Family character designs have been under fire before. I mean, there's a whole change.org petition to get Dejanay's character design for the reboot, The Proud Family Louder and Prouder, to be changed, as some people see her as playing into negative stereotypes of dark-skinned black girls. And according to the petition, her name was initially Delinqueneta. Designing characters of color is tricky, even if you're an artist of color yourself. A lot of character designing is based on the small, medium, and large principle, and exaggerating features in order to get a character's personality across. Stoic from How to Train Your Dragon, for example, is stoic, so therefore he's shaped like a brick. The baby character type or the cute character type is used in a lot of Disney movies when designing female characters, for example, who are given really big eyes but smaller noses and mouths. And for white characters, this really isn't a problem because, well, they're white, but when you add race into things, it can all get very iffy really quickly, especially in animation. In the US, people of color have been drawn as racist caricatures, where white artists specifically enhanced features that were seen as other, such as large mouths, noses, small squinty eyes, buck teeth, in order to be funny or to scare people. And remnants of these racist cartoon archetypes or stereotypes still exist in character designing today. For example, if you look at some of the Moana character designs and visual development work, the products are something. James Woods, who's a character artist, did some honestly questionable concept art for Moana back in the mid-2010s. And of course, there are these character concept designs for Aladdin dating back to the 90s by Don Yips, a character artist and cartoonist from the Netherlands. And I don't think that any of this, of course, was intentional, including the design of the Chang triplets, which aren't really that bad in the end, but still annoying. A lot of our biases are unconscious, which is why we need to constantly check ourselves. It's important to think about, when designing characters of color, how you could be adding to the racist stereotyping of an entire group of people, especially if you're a white character designer, but also if you're a character designer of color, designing characters of a different race than your own. All in all, I think the Proud Family was both a product of its time and also ahead of its time. It wasn't perfect, obviously, but I think it was trying, and I think for at least trying, it deserves some credit. With progress, things are going to be messy. They're not going to be perfect, and they're not going to please everyone. But as long as it's a step in the right direction, I don't see much harm in it. At least that's my opinion. So now let's move on to another product of the early 2000s, American Dragon, Jake Long. American Dragon, Jake Long premiered on January 21st, 2005 and ended January 29, 2006 and was created by Jeff Good. It had 52 episodes of 55 segments as well as an animation overhaul in Season 2, and the opening song was re-recorded by none other than the Jonas Brothers. Dante Bosco, who is famously known for voicing Zuko from Avatar, voices Jake Long, a Chinese-American kid living in New York City. I honestly didn't really watch American Dragon Jake Long. All I remember is that they turn into dragons and that there's a blonde girl with a dragon tattoo or like birthmark, and that means something. What was cool about it, in my opinion, is that it was a show with a Chinese-American male lead, and they really brought home the fact that he was an American dragon. I think it was also cool that the show, much like The Proud Family, focused on kids of color living in the present day. Not to mention that a lot of the people behind the scenes were Asian and Asian American, including directors and voice actors. The show does continue to have a small cult following, but I personally just never got into it. I guess one thing that people might have complained about was that they literally turn into dragons, and that kind of adds to like this mystique of the East, or that Asian people are magic thing. But I don't really know how well that critique really holds up, because it's a kid's show and kids like dragons, and turning into a dragon is just kind of awesome. I wonder if they're ever going to like reboot it like they're doing with The Proud Family and other cartoons from like the early 2000s because of nostalgia. But it is on Disney Plus if you want to watch it there. And you know, there's some interesting lore with like the dragon hunters and stuff. So if that's something that you'd be into, go check it out.
The what?
The Prindle.
Are you referring to the shift lever that says PRNDL?
That's a child's Mosby. I know how to spell Prindle.
It is not something you spell. It is a gear shift. The letters stand for park, reverse, neutral, drive, and low.
You're making me nervous with all this technical talk.
Oh, I'm sorry. Why don't we just relax? We'll turn on the radio. Would you like am or film?
The Sweet Life of Zack and Cody aired from March 18, 2005 to September 1st, 2008, and starred London Tipton, portrayed by Brenda Song, who's the daughter of Thai and Hmong immigrants. Her character is the rich and oftentimes self-centered, bratty, and dumb heiress of the hotel where the main cast works and lives. Though she's known for being spoiled rotten, she tends to have her heart of gold moments and is even shown as being pretty smart and savvy, though she's again mainly seen as dumb. Her character is very much a product of the time, like most things on Disney Channel were. During the early 2000s, entertainment very much focused on the lives of the super rich, especially before the 2008 financial crash, and London Tipton is obviously a spoof of Paris Hilton, who reached her peak of fame during the show's airing. Making fun of women for being vapid and shallow and only caring about fashion was all the rage back in the early 2000s, so a lot of the humor surrounding London's character based itself off around that. What I personally think is interesting is that London was supposed to be like a ditzy Asian and not like a super smart, nerdy Asian, and I guess was trying to break stereotypes. But honestly, as a kid, I didn't really relate to her that much and found her character's shallowness and wealth to be a nuisance. But looking back on her character as an adult, I do think that it was kind of awesome that London was able to just be another character on the show. I think that there was like this weird thing going on in the early 2000s on Disney Channel where they were more eager to address race up until at least like 2005. And then there was like this movement to be more colorblind. And also, this move away from more racially aware stories happened at the same time Michael Eisner was ousted from the Disney company and Bob Iger was brought in. I honestly don't know if that leads to any correlations or anything, but it is something to think about. Overall, I like that London was able to just exist on the show as a character independent of her race, and felt at least somewhat happy seeing her on screen, even though I personally didn't relate to her. She also had an interesting family dynamic too, of like a busy father and no mother, and how Mr. Mosby was actually more of a father to her than her actual father. And there's definitely a message of found family in the show that I really do like. Yes, there is an eating disorder episode on The Sweet Life of Zack and Cody, and it is called Health and Fitness. In this episode, London and Maddie both want to compete in a fashion show, but because of London's snooty friend, they start seeing warped versions of themselves, and it kind of touches on body dysmorphia, for example. Maddie tries to gain weight, whereas London refuses to eat, and they both end up sick. They later realize that they're just fine the way they are, and that's kind of the end of it. I remember this episode pretty well because I, like most people, have struggled with an eating disorder, and I think since specifically East Asian women have like this stereotype that they're just naturally thin and that they can eat whatever they want without gaining weight, I think it was refreshing to me as a kid to see another East Asian woman struggle with an eating disorder and body image issues and then feeling okay with the skin she's in. As for the class issues, London's position as the daughter of the CEO of the company or of the hotel chain should taint any relationship that she has with the employees, but actually the opposite occurs. Maddie and Mosby care enough about London to see her as a real person and not just use her for her money or fear her. In the episode, Poor Little Rich Girl, London's father goes broke and therefore London is broke. All of her rich friends leave her because she no longer has her wealth and status, but Maddie offers to let London live with her until she gets back on her feet. In Maddie's room, London makes her ignorant remarks about how small it is, but by the end comes around to this less luxurious style of living. At the end of the episode, London of course gets her money back as her father strikes oil in a diamondless diamond mine, but she also realizes that her and Maddie are really friends because all of her other rich friends abandoned her, but Maddie stayed by her side, and I think that is a nice sentiment. I can also see how some people might think or see London as playing into this crazy rich Asian stereotype or, reinforcing the model minority myth. But at the time, that wasn't really in the modern zeitgeist. Like, the crazy rich Asian stereotype, I guess, has only really come to the forefront in the 2010s or even just in the 2020s with House of Ho and the Bling Empire and, of course, the movie and book series of Crazy Rich Asians. So I don't think personally that London plays too much into that. In the end, I don't mind London's character. I think that she was cool to see, at least as a kid, another Asian person, and also that it was emphasized that she was American too. They don't really, I don't think in the show, address too much that she's Asian. There's a really big emphasis that she's just a regular person and that she was just another character on the show, and I really appreciate that. But let me know what you think of her character in the comments down below.
Tears and Troy?
What? Yeah?
I was a huge High School Musical fan from the moment it aired, January 20th, 2006. I was the perfect age for it. I think I was like 11 at the time. I was just entering middle school and ending elementary school. And the music was just my jam. My favorite song, of course, being Sharpay and Ryan's rendition of What I've Been Looking For. Iconic. And what I don't think a lot of people know, or what at least I didn't know until recently, was that Vanessa Hudgens, who plays Gabriella Montez, is actually half Filipina on her mother's side. This isn't really addressed in High School Musical, but her name is Gabriella Montez, which of course makes sense as the Philippines were also colonized by Spain. And on the fan wiki it says that Gabriella is a tan-skinned young lady of Filipina-American descent with brown hair and brown eyes. The ethnicity of Gabriella Montez has been debated on whether she's Filipina or Latina, but either way, Vanessa Hudgens herself is Filipina-American. However, some people still do wonder if she is Latina. In a Univision News from Hawaii interview, she was asked, "You're Filipino, but how often do people assume you're Latina?" Yes, people always think that. They start speaking to me in Spanish, and I'm like, no comprende. But I'm trying to learn a bit more Spanish so that I can travel more. Celeb Answers Sandra Robinson writes, in a 2012 interview with Selena Gomez and Chelsea Handler on the show Chelsea Lately to promote their upcoming movie Spring Breakers, the topic of being Latina came up. The answer Hudgens gave when asked if she was Latina left a lot of people confused. The actress said, "I mean, kind of, a little bit." Like I said before, Vanessa Hudgens is Filipina American, and I think it's important that we point out that she, along with Brenda Song, who I mentioned before, is tan-skinned, because usually the standard, or the beauty standard for Asian women in general, is to have pale skin. So it's nice to see Asian women with tanner complexions. Overall, I do like High School Musical, like I said, and I like Vanessa Hudgens' performance and her character, Gabriella. However, her character isn't really given much of anything to do and is kind of boring. She's the shy, somewhat dorky or nerdy one who loses herself in a song. She's the not like other girls girl that you're supposed to want to connect to as an awkward 11-year-old in 2006, and in the end, it did work, at least for me. Troy and Gabriella's story fit into the whole Disney Channel mold of the early 2000s, which was not like other boys boy gets with not like other girls girl, but thankfully they're not childhood best friends. But much like media from Disney in the early 2000s, stories mainly aimed at young middle school girls center male protagonists, their happiness, their goals, and their wishes. I find this really ironic in my opinion. There were so many female-led shows and co-led shows on Disney and Nick, and they were aimed at young girls, but a lot of them, including High School Musical, like the original series of 3 movies, were focused on the guy character and not the girl. Anyway, long story short, I think that Gabriella does kind of get the shaft. You know, she has solo songs, but they're usually, if not always, about Troy, and they're also kind of sad and downers. And I don't know, like, her lack of character growth just annoys me mainly because she's only there to be Troy's love interest and the self-insert character and not much more. By the 3rd movie, she does become more independent and less shy, and she does go her own way. But I don't know, she deserved a bigger and better story, especially as the co-lead of High School Musical. And I'm sure that Disney thought that they were being progressive since they're casting, like, you know, not a white girl to be the main female lead or the main love interest for the main character. But when you give her nothing to do, she just starts to feel hollow. And I think out of fear of being offensive, they decided to make her as inoffensive as possible, and it just turned out meh. It also reminds me of this SNL sketch, but I don't think I'm gonna end up putting it here because of copyright. Anyway, Gabriella deserved better. So I know that there's been a Sharpay renaissance, and I guess rightfully so, especially since she was like the main one who cared about musical theater but didn't get the Juilliard scholarship. She was also written to be overly girly, which is sexist movie shorthand for vapid, shallow, and mean. In addition, her villainy comes from being too self-assured and too ambitious, when Troy and Gabriella aren't vilified for going after their male-approved dreams of basketball and science and later law. Sharpay's overly ambitious nature is usually something that's punished in female characters, for example Miranda Priestley, but rewarded in male characters, much like in real life, especially when it comes to vapid and girly interests and professions like fashion or musical theater. This is why Gabriella is seen as more progressive, because she wants to be a scientist or a lawyer and doesn't care about fashion or whatever other girls are into. And the dichotomy between mean girls who like pink and nerdy shy girls who don't is obviously wrong, and women can do and be both, and just because a woman is into girly things like musical theater or pink or fashion or cheerleading or whatever doesn't make them bad people. And it is honestly really terrible how women who are into all of the things that they're told to be into, like shopping, pink, and celebrity, are seen as bad, whereas less feminine girls and women are seen as better because they're one of the guys, but of course still bangable. A cool girl, if you will. But in the end, there really is no winning. When girls are too weird and too unfeminine, they're then given a makeover to make them more girly. And it's like, can we ever catch a break? And just because Sharpay deserves better doesn't mean that the other women in High School Musical don't deserve better, but sometimes I just see like this very nasty juxtaposition in some of the conversations going on that really scream, protect white women to me. Like in one of the original threads of Sharpay's A Victim, they call out Taylor for being anti-feminist. Yes, in a Disney Channel original movie from 2006, because she makes fun of the stereotypical way cheerleaders talk.
Isn't Troy Bolton just the hottie super bum? Oh,
and honestly, give me a freaking break. Like, yes, let's shit on the only black female character in the HSM universe. The two women of color in High School Musical, Gabriella and Taylor, are both written to be nerdy, and therefore they do make fun of girlier students, which in movie shorthand means cheerleaders, but probably only because the writers thought that was the most relatable thing to do for the audience that they were targeting. And of course, this type of media pressured a lot of girls to distance themselves from their girlier interests, which is sad, and I honestly always wondered what popular kids, thought of DCOMs, because they paint them really badly and they're usually almost always the villains in DCOMs. But honestly, as a kid, I kind of needed that. There was a lot of N-Log stuff coming out at this time. You Belong With Me comes to mind as like the pinnacle of let's make fun of cheerleaders. And it is really bad that they've had such a bad rep for so long. But at the same time, are we going to pretend that there's not a hierarchy in high school, at least when I was in high school and when the movie came out, and that just numbers-wise, most kids were outsiders and not validated by their peers or their school systems, and they looked to movies like High School Musical to do that for them? Of course, I think it's wrong to judge people for cheering or for doing anything that's stereotypically girly. And in fact, cheerleading is a highly intensive and dangerous sport, and also a severely underpaid profession. But please, let's not act as though some cheerleaders in high school, or just girls in general, particularly white girls who were considered popular because they were rich or stereotypically attractive, use their position as a form of power when it comes to who's who in the school food chain and in a school setting in general, at least back in the day in 2006. I think the N-Log thing is a form of internalized misogyny, but just blaming it on that does take away a lot of women and girls' agencies, and the fact that women do make their own choices and act on their own accord and think for themselves. And sometimes women and girls are mean to each other, and it's not because of internalized misogyny, it's just because we're human. Kids are mean to each other. The cheerleaders probably bullied Taylor and Gabriella because they're into science, and then they do the same thing back to the cheerleaders because that's school and they're kids. Like, it's really not that deep sometimes. But of course, it also does show the writers' biases of thinking that all cheerleaders are vapid and self-centered and whatnot. But honestly, it still freaking annoys me. Like, that whole thread, or at least that part of that thread, really annoyed me. And again, I'm not saying that all cheerleaders are these mean girls and all these nerdy girls are like little precious angels, just that these are labels. And at the end of the day, people pick on one another. And yes, that's wrong, but there's still like a greater context to these things. Not everything a girl says or does, or a woman says or does, needs to be feminist or empowering. Girls can just exist and should just exist. Some girls don't like cheerleading. Some girls don't like science. And it's not because they're anti-feminist or backwards or have internalized misogyny. It's because women are human beings and have different interests from one another. And I know that these are just characters in a movie and I'm projecting a lot, but honestly, if you don't care about that or don't like that, why are you watching this channel? And also, a lot of the Sharpay's, the victim stuff, is just hyperbolic in order to get an emotional reaction out of you. I mean, look at me, I'm reacting to it right now, but it's still annoying. Some other points that are made in the Twitter thread are also really annoying to me. Like, oh, she gave them all jobs and is helping Troy out with his connections. But like, is she doing that out of the goodness of her heart? No. Just let Sharpay be a villain. She's written as a villain, and honestly a pretty cool one at that. And even honestly sympathetic at times. I liked Sharpay as a kid, and I think that we can just embrace her villainy and not try to make her out as a victim. Like, we don't need to redeem every single villain. And also, like, does giving them jobs at her country club mean that they owe her? No. And then in the thread, they're also mad that Troy's okay with using Sharpay for his own gain. And it's like, yeah, that is okay. She's freaking rich. Not to mention that she's the one that started this and had the plan to manipulate him in the first place. And of course, there is something very cathartic as an audience member of color seeing the blonde girl not get what she wants. And I'm sorry, but that's just satisfying when you're 11 years old. So no, my mind isn't blown when you say that Sharpay's actually a victim. If anything, honestly, it just goes to show how far people are willing to go to protect white feminine women. Though it is important to note that Sharpay wasn't meant to be a mean girl character, and in fact in the first movie the jocks bully her and make fun of her for being into musical theater and for being girly. And she's also not like the queen bee of the school, she's just a very ambitious theater kid. And of course, I do feel bad for her to an extent, especially what her character added to, for example, demonizing ultra-femininity. But at the same time, blame the writers for that, not the audience members. Lastly, Sharpay gets to be a full, well-rounded character and gets some of the most awesome musical numbers in the entire series. And she does end up getting what's hers in her own spin-off movie, so it's like, calm down. All of her looks are also iconic, and I remember really preferring Sharpay's songs to Gabriella's, and as a white character, Sharpay is able to exist outside of her race, and that's called privilege. Taylor the Brainiac and Gabriella, the other Brainiac, are fine and decent, but they have to be perfect because the writers were too afraid to give them any real flaws or story because of their race, and that's sad and honestly such a missed opportunity. Sure, Taylor and Gabriella's ambition is seen as good and progressive because they're into acceptable subjects that are male approved, while that's a trait that's demonized in Sharpay because pink, and I think that's wrong, but I still think that they deserved better too. All of the women of High School Musical deserved bigger and better musical numbers and stories, but specifically the characters of color, since there's literally only like 2 women of color in the entire main cast, and they get the blandest and safest storylines. Like I said, post-2005, Disney started taking a more colorblind approach to casting and not mentioning racial issues as much, and just having people of color in the show because diversity, but they didn't really know what diversity meant. This can be seen, like I said, with the likes of Gabriella Montez and Taylor McKessie, who are just kind of there, even though the former is the second lead in the movie, and with the casting of the bullies in the 2006 DCOM Return to Halloween Town, and with the bullies from the little show you might have heard of, Hannah Montana. So in Return to Halloween Town, there are a few villains, but one of them is the Sinister family, which is an Asian family with a powerful patriarch and 3 sinister daughters whose job it is to torment Marnie. And I want to make it clear that I don't think that having Asian people be the villains is a bad thing, but when they're your only representation in the entire movie, it's kind of questionable. They're also, of course, very into makeup and fashion and accessories, so they're even more demonized for being highly feminine as opposed to the more down-to-earth Marnie. Next, there are the bullies from Hannah Montana. Yes, the black and Asian mean girl duo who bully the poor white kids. Anna Maria Perez de Tagle, who's Filipina-American, plays Ashley DeWitt, and Shanika Knowles portrays Amber Addison. Both, again, girls who are into fashion and are stereotypically girly and therefore seen as shallow compared to Miley, who gets to be more complex. Honestly, the more that I write this script, the more regressive Disney Channel seems to get. The Asian mean girl trope can also be seen with the cool Asians in Mean Girls. Even though it was nice to see that Asian people can also be mean and nerdy band geeks, the labels still dehumanize them even if they seem like compliments. And I get that, yeah, labels are the point of the lunchroom scene and it's meant to be reductive, but the Asian characters in Mean Girls are never given more than that. The Asian Mean Girls in particular are used as comic relief because of how foreign they are. Lastly, the Asian Mean Girl thing in Hannah Montana didn't really help with seeing Asian people as seen with this incident that Miley did in the early 2000s. Wendy who? Wendy Wu for Homecoming Queen!
Wendy who? Wendy Wu for Homecoming Queen.
So now let's finally talk about Wendy Wu Homecoming Warrior. Wendy Wu Homecoming Warrior is a Disney Channel original movie that came out in the summer of 2006, starring Brenda Song and Shin Koyamada, and directed by John Lang. The film was written by Vincent Chung, Ben Montano, Lydia Look, who voiced the Chang triplets on The Proud Family, and Mark Seabrooks. And overall, it was entertaining. The film tells the story of Wendy Wu, a daughter of a Chinese-American family who's also the most popular girl in school. She's running for homecoming queen against her old rival Jessica, and all seems well and good until Shen shows up. Shen is a Buddhist monk from China, though he isn't portrayed by a Chinese actor, but a Japanese one. Anyway, he comes to town and turns not only Wendy's life upside down, but the entire Wu family's life topsy-turvy. You see, Wendy and her family aren't really in touch with their Chinese heritage, or even really know anything about China or Chinese history at all. Like, not even the terracotta warriors, like really the freaking terracotta warriors. I do think that the theme of having immigrants reconnect with their culture is important because a lot of the time Asian Americans try to assimilate the best they can to keep their heads down and just be seen as everyday Americans. But of course that never works because Asian, but it is a survival tactic. However, the Wus know like zero about even big news events, like again, the Terracotta Warriors. And I know that they only do this because kids are watching and they want to try to educate kids, but like, I don't know, it just feels really pandery. Like, I don't know who this is for, really. However, there are touching moments in the movie, like the dad storyline when he talks about feeling guilty for turning his back on Chinese culture growing up. But here's the biggest problem. They never talk about why people do this, or what made them feel othered, what made them scared and embarrassed to embrace their culture in the first place. Like, maybe talk about anti-Asian sentiment and stereotypes about Chinese people being seen as perpetual foreigners. Or even flash back to when Wendy was a kid and try to explain why she feels the way she does about her Chinese heritage. You know, maybe we could even have some racial bullying thrown in there. There are so many examples I could pick from my own childhood to just spark that resentment of your own culture and race, but the film doesn't do any of that. One thing that made me feel othered, and that definitely, you know, they could have put in the movie, is, you know, being bowed to, kids asking me if I ate dogs, you know, pulling their eyes back at me or talking to me in Chinese, which was just a bunch of chings and chongs, or making hi-ya noises at me, or being called wonton soup or chop suey, you know, or even teachers assuming that I'm related to Jeremy Lin because of my name. And to really talk about where I'm coming from when I talk about Wendy Wu Homecoming Warrior, I think it's important to talk about my own upbringing and why I'm just so baffled at the choices that they made in this movie. And I don't really like to get personal on this channel, so this is a really big deal for me. But when I was a kid, I went to Chinese school. And I was really embarrassed to tell people. Even my close friends didn't know about it. And when I revealed it to them, you know, it was a really big thing for me because I was so embarrassed and ashamed that I went to this after-school school. And even though I felt ashamed, my mom always told me, you know, to not be ashamed and to be proud of who I was. And from when I was a kid, she constantly immersed me in all that she could teach me about the country I was born. You know, for example, I went to Chinese school, you know, we watched foreign language movies in Mandarin, we went to opera performances, we went to Chinatown a lot, especially during the Mid-Autumn Festival and Lunar New Year, and it was a lot, and as a kid I did really like it, but I also, of course, as a kid found it to be embarrassing. And my mom's insistence of me trying to bridge that gap and to educate my class on Chinese culture, you know, really backfired tremendously, you know, when I was a kid, because me trying to like teach these people about Chinese culture, or even my mom coming in and trying to teach these people, really just made me stick out even more and made me a target of harassment. You know, even though I did really like Chinese school and going to Chinatown, you know, I wanted to keep my regular life and my Chinese school life separate. But it was really hard to do that because the adults in my life thought that bringing Lunar New Year to a bunch of rude white kids was going to help them stop bullying me or help them understand me, when it just didn't. It actually made me really resentful of being Chinese, and honestly of my mom. But nowadays I am grateful, really grateful for what she did. But I also still sometimes feel embarrassed, you know, about what I look like. You know, just the other day someone asked me if I knew this Korean family downtown here in Fortaleza, just because they thought that I was Korean. And also like as if all Asian people know each other. And they do talk kind of about bigotry with Wendy's boyfriend, who thinks Shen is weird, and Wendy defends Shen as she learns more about Chinese history and culture and learns to embrace her own identity. And it's not bad, but it never gets too into race at all. The one really cool thing that they showed about Chinese culture is Kung Fu and martial arts, which is true. Martial arts and kung fu is cool, but I feel like that's just such an overexposed element of Chinese culture, at least in the United States. And even like saying Chinese culture is really weird because China is a huge country of various ethnic groups with their own traditions and cultures. A moment that I thought was lost in the movie was that rather than teaching more things about Chinese history for Wendy to pass her history test, Wendy just meditates and then all of this knowledge comes back to her from her past lives, that she's like the descendant or the reincarnation of the woman warrior who's the only one that can stop like the evil villain in the end. And honestly, I found that to be kind of annoying because it was a huge waste of time. Like, yeah, they explain why she needs to meditate and is really good at martial arts. It's in her DNA. But I feel like that was just really taking this idea of rediscovering your heritage to an oddly literal level.
Wait, are you saying I don't have to study?
No, we all have to study. You just have to learn how to remember 1,500 years of lessons.
One thing I did like was that Wendy was wary and embarrassed of Shen at first and acted like a real kid when meeting this literal stranger who follows her around, trying to tell her that the end is near and that she's the only one that can stop the thing. Like, the first 30 minutes of the movie is just Shen convincing her of this extremely odd plot of, you're the reincarnation of the woman warrior and the only one who can save us, / I just want to be homecoming queen and be a normal girl. The tonal dissonance in the movie is really funny at times, and the writers are clearly self-aware of what this movie is, which does make it a lot funnier. Shen has some great lines that he whispers throughout the film that acknowledge how silly it all is, and they're really good.
I've never worn anything except that stupid robe.
And you don't do kung fu. Kung fu is a way of life.
Did you get that out of a movie?
It sounded better when Jackie Chan said it.
I may be alone, but I have the will of many. Hope it's enough to beat these guys.
In addition, they have these ancient scrolls with like these modern images on them, and it's just like hilarious to me. Even seeing Shen just walk out of the airport and trying to like get a ride is hilarious. They really play up the juxtaposition and it works. When they try to make it all serious, that's when it kind of falls flat, like when Wendy gives herself a pep talk about why homecoming is more important than saving the world. Like, yeah, maybe that's how a teenager would think, but I think most teenagers would be like, yeah, saving the world is a lot more important than homecoming. And that also retcons her character growth. Wendy is the stereotypical self-centered high school girl who needs to learn to be more accepting of not only other people, but of her own heritage. She needs to learn to care about things larger than herself, and she does. But when it's revealed that the homecoming dance and the end of the world are on the same day, she chooses the homecoming dance, and it's like, really? But other than that, I like Wendy's character. I think that she's written like a real kid, and it's cool that she can be both girly and also a fighter. Like, after learning martial arts, she doesn't suddenly just drop her girly self or her girly side or see girly things as bad. Rather, it's her mindset that changes. I do think that writing stories about Chinese people or Chinese Americans needing to rediscover their heritage without talking about why people lose it to begin with or want to be rid of it in the first place is annoying. But I think it's done at least well enough in this movie that it's not too bad. I also do think that there's some really interesting commentary when Wendy tricks her friends into thinking that Shen is just some weird guy from China in order to not explain what's really going on with them and the whole world ending. Her playing into stereotypes of weird Chinese people with her friends to make it easier for her to get them to understand why Shen is the way he is reminded me a lot of Borat and how ignorant white people can be, that they just go along with anything because he's just some strange foreigner. As a kid, I didn't really like this movie because of all the hi-yas and how that kind of enforced, stereotypes about Asian people that non-Asian people in the US already have about Asian people, such as being good at martial arts. And sometimes movies like this one just add to the bullying that Asian kids get already. Like, sometimes as a kid, I would be embarrassed when I saw Asian people on TV because it's like, oh God, what stereotype are they reinforcing now? And there was and still are just so few Asian-centered shows and characters and stories that it's just like very awkward seeing like the one Asian thing on TV and like that's supposed to represent you. But I think looking back at Wendy Wu as an adult and watching it 15 years later, it is just kind of there, and it is, like I said, oddly entertaining. I don't think it does any harm, and I do think that it's really well-meaning and funny, but it definitely needed to dig a little deeper and explain why Chinese Americans feel excluded in American society, rather than just shame Chinese people for disavowing their culture just 'cause. So I know that this was only supposed to be a talk about Disney Channel from the early 2000s, but I decided to check out some newer shows in order to see how Disney Channel, progressed in the 2010s era, and since, of course, when I was a kid. I stopped watching Disney Channel when I was around 15, so I definitely didn't watch shows like Jessie, and definitely not Andi Mack, which has been highly praised for being, a great show. So let's just quickly dive into them and see what they're all about.
Who's this little fella?
That's Ravi. You've already met him.
Texas, your mother's wedding?
His giant lizard briefly dated your dog.
So in 2011, the fever dream that is Jessie happened. Jessie was created as a vehicle for Debbie Ryan, who starred on The Sweet Life on Deck, and her own DCOM, 16 Wishes. Both Ryan and Pamela Ellis O'Connell were thinking of ideas for a new show after On Deck was set to close, and O'Connell was inspired to write a type of nanny story, as she was one of the co-producers of The Nanny. In an interview with Star Telegram, Ryan explained how the concept originated. O'Connell and I were throwing ideas back and forth when Sweet Life was coming to an end, and she came up with this. I was absolutely captivated. Then Disney looked at the script and the showrunner, O'Connell, and myself, and they were like, "Awesome, we like it. You're on in the fall." O'Connell said that she was originally inspired by jet-setting celebrity parents with big families of multiracial and multi-ethnic adopted children, and that New York City would be a fun place for them to grow up because they could have the big penthouse apartment and whatnot. In an interview with the Boston Herald, O'Connell described her inspiration saying, "I thought the celebrity parents and gorgeous penthouse would be glamorous. And it's a nice contrast to Jessie's more modest Texas roots. That fish out of water element makes for good stories. And I was inspired by many families who have adopted children of different ethnicities." So basically, let's have the poor and humble white lead be bossed around by these rich, spoiled, multi-ethnic children. In this section, I'm going to be talking about Ravi Ross, who's portrayed by Karan Bar, and his impact as one of, if not the only Indian American characters on Disney Channel during the early 2010s. Ravi Ross was the last of the Ross children to be adopted. The parents originally thought they were actually adopting a baby due to a misprint on the paperwork, but it turns out that they were actually adopting a child. Because that's funny.
It's from my birth mother. Go on, Luke. Open it. What does it say, honey? It's kind of great.
Anyway, because of this, he speaks English with an Indian accent, even though the actor Karan Bar was born and raised in the United States. But that's honestly, the least of anyone's problems with this character. It's mostly been noted that he plays into Indian stereotypes and stereotypes of Asian people in general, and reinforces Orientalism, or the fetishization of the East, by white and non-Asian writers and artists. Orientalist works and characters usually reinforce the mystique of the East, and see Asia not as a continent with distinct countries and cultures, but rather a land of backwards and regressive ideas and filled with barbaric, but also mystical and magical people. Usually in Orientalist works, there's a fascination with the cultures and peoples, but also a repulsion. On Capeswell's WordPress blog, where they write about Bollywood and Disney, they said this about Ravi in 2014. The entire character is straight out of Edward Said's Orientalism. Essentially, Orientalism is when Westerners lump the entire continent of Asia into one foreign land, which they then can associate everything that they don't understand. He, Ravi, talks with an exaggerated accent and is constantly referencing Ganesh, samosas, tigers, nonviolence, fortune-telling, and curry, to name a few. He teaches a yoga class and wears sherwanis. In a 2020 article in the HSLA Times, Manas Katori wrote this on the character of Ravi. The stereotypes and soft racism in Jessie went far deeper than a forced accent. Ravi is a flat character in the show and represents the classic Indian, an awkward, nerdy, unathletic boy. His main purpose is to serve as the butt of jokes from other non-Indian characters. In one episode, another character refers to Ravi as a traffic cone when he's wearing traditional clothes. Most notably, Ravi has a pet lizard named Mr. Kipling, whose presence is a recurring joke throughout the seasons. The lizard's name is a clear reference to Rudyard Kipling, author of The Jungle Book, and a strong advocate for imperialism. Having an Indian character own a pet named after the man who wrote The White Man's Burden does not seem coincidental. I'm sure that the creators of Jessie and writers thought that they were being progressive, as most white parents are seen as progressive for adopting and taking up the white man's burden, if you will, of imposing their own civilization onto these poor children of color, but it just comes off as orientalist and racist, specifically to Indian American children who got called Ravi and made fun of in school because of this character being more of a caricature than a fleshed out human being. As Katori writes, in the next couple of years, my classmates would start to come up to me and make comments that I had never heard before. They would insult my skin color, ask if I had gross Indian food for lunch, and pointed out my hairy arms and my budding mustache. As I looked into the mirror, these features started to stand out, making me hate them more and more. In particular, kids would start referring to me by the name of Ravi. Why were they calling me that? Why did they decide to make fun of me now? It did not occur to me that the mustache, the food, and the name all tied back to the comical character from Jessie, a character that had gradually come to hate more than love. This is what happens when a big channel like Disney pushes stereotypes rather than stories. Kids of color get bullied and harassed in real life, ironically because of these characters that are supposed to represent them. I'm sure that there are some Indian American people who like Ravi's character and who are happy that he existed, but I'm also sure that many more wish that he and his lizard, Mr. Kipling, didn't exist at all. Ravi's character also reminded me a lot of Anyang from Arrested Development, who also wore like silk pajamas and worn-torn clothing, and it's like, it's freaking 2004. Like, is that what people in the US think that people from South Korea wore at the turn of the century? And also, like, do people in the US, the writers of Jessie, if you will, really think that people go around India wearing sherwanis and kurtas on a daily basis? As a side note, Jessie was even planning on having an Asian adoptee from Korea named Hiro, and I think we all dodged a bullet on that one. This kind of representation makes me also think of my sociology college textbook, where they showed pictures of how people look around the world. And instead of showing everyday people, they show people in traditional dress. I made a whole video about why this annoys me that I'll link here. But long story short, it's this sensationalist BS that reinforces ignorance. Like, yes, people in China go around every day wearing their ethnic clothing, and that's currently the beauty standard in 2021 or 2017 or whenever this book was published. The only beauty standard that they actually get right is the one from the US, that they have like a picture of like a white dude. And yeah, that's accurate. But having this quote-unquote normal-looking dude next to all these ethnic-looking people sends a very clear message of this is default and this is other. And it's very dehumanizing, even though it's supposed to be like celebrating diversity.
Instead, we need to celebrate our diversity.
Let's celebrate.
Right. Okay.
Celebrate good times. Come on! Let's celebrate diversity, right?
And I do think that they were trying to be progressive by showing these people in their cultural dress, but it just comes off as very like, look how weird these people are, especially in a textbook that's being used in the US, where most people already see these countries in the global south in a poor and exotic light. People's traditional dress should be uplifted and known in a respectful way, but there's just too much white gaze in this textbook for it to have like a meaningful impact on the reader, much like on Disney Channel. In the end, the textbook just uses the most sensationalist pictures that they can find, and it just makes me feel so embarrassed and prompts questions of like, do people in China really dress like that? You know, do people in India really do that? Do people in Brazil look like that? Etc. And it's like, it's so overgeneralizing and reductive that it honestly just makes me want to crawl under my bed. and never come out. Representation in kids' media has a bigger impact than I think we really ever knew about until now, because it really impacts the bullying of real children. As far as Indian American representation on Disney Channel goes, they are making like the first ever Indian American DCOM this year, and it's called Spin, so go check that out when it does drop. I already made a whole video on this that I'll put here, but let me just touch on this subject briefly. Being raised by a different race of parents is a unique experience, and obviously, not the same as being raised by Asian parents, but that doesn't really mean that we ourselves aren't Asian or don't experience discrimination because of our race. Nor does that mean that we're ignorant to our culture's history or the country from where we're born. In fact, I think most adoptees have a higher interest in their culture or the country that they're originally from in order to bridge that tie that was severed from them at birth or whenever they came to be adopted. Asian American adoptees are shunned by the Asian community due to the nonsense and gatekeeping around who can be Asian and who can't, and that's freaking frustrating. Rather than understanding an adoptee's experience, we're written off because being in a racially mixed family means that you don't experience being othered on a daily basis for some reason. They're just different experiences and should be seen as such, and they shouldn't be compared to each other because they're incomparable. Trying to compare them or say what experience is the real Asian American experience or the most authentic is just honestly a waste of time. And I think that Ravi's character and the show of Jessie could have touched on that more, but they just made him the perpetual foreigner, and that sucks. There needs to be more representation of Asian American adoptees because we too are part of the community, no matter what anyone else thinks. Now I want to talk about the fetishization of adoption. A lot of people who aren't part of interracial families or families, that have adopted children think that interracial families are exotic or cute and try to fetishize them. But specifically if the family has white parents with kids of other races, which is basically the whole premise of Jessie, so that's great. And there's even an episode of Jessie called Gotcha Day, and it's like... Many strangers when meeting blended families make the strangest comments like, wow, you must have really wanted kids, to the parents, and it's like, what? And to the kids, people usually say, oh, you're so lucky. And ironically, most adoptive parents see themselves as the lucky ones to have children, not the other way around. Yet many people from the outside love to romanticize families like these because they see them as different and not just a regular family, which they are. As many of you know, I'm an interracial adoptee, and a lot of people just don't get it. People constantly ask me if I speak Chinese, even though I explicitly tell them that I was adopted as a baby before I could even learn to talk. They ask me what the orphanage was like, if I ever want to meet my birth parents, and all of these other really, deep questions that are really intrusive, and it's like, please go away. People also look at the lives of adoptees who are adopted into wealthy white families and think that it's like this sort of dream come true, but why? Because of this belief that the US is the greatest country on earth and that you're being saved from like this communist or poverty-ridden country without any of the self-awareness that the US is the one terrorizing the rest of the world. Of course, being adopted into a wealthy family is awesome, but it's honestly just the same thing as being born into a rich family. But because it's not seen as that and it seems as though like you're chosen, you then have to be grateful for X, Y, and Z, and it's just a lot. It also adds to this narrative that all children are adopted into wealthy homes when that's not true. And wealth, of course, doesn't mean that the family is happy and perfect, but they are financially secure. But again, that doesn't mean that there isn't resentment or anger between an adoptee and their adoptive family. But many times, writers love to paint adoptees' lives as like this dream life because it's easier to digest than to actually delve into the unique problems that adoptees face in interracial families, having to navigate their race, ethnicity, and class. I think some people are also scared to talk about the problems that the adoptee community faces because we don't want to feed into that stereotype that like all adopted kids are effed up, or, you know, we don't want to be defined by our trauma. But I think it is really important that we talk about, you know, problems in the adoptee community or problems that people have with being adopted, because that's part of the experience for some people. But not wanting to, you know, fit into those stereotypes definitely does make it harder to speak out as an adoptee. In the end, I think that Jessie could have been a really subversive show and talk about adoption and interracial adoption and what it's like having, you know, parents that don't look like you. And I think that they do kind of touch upon that in the show. But as far as like the characters go, they left a lot to be desired. So the last show I want to talk about is Andi Mack, which aired from 2017 to 2019 and was created by Terry Minsky, who also created Lizzie McGuire. The show had 3 seasons with a total of 57 episodes and has become known as one of the most progressive Disney Channel shows for having the first main gay character, Cyrus Goodman, as well as revolving around a Chinese-American girl named Andi Mack. In the first season, Andi Mack discovers that her sister is actually her mom, and her mom is actually her grandmother, making it one of, if not the first Disney Channel show to tackle teen pregnancy. Due to the show's premise, it also highlights a household of 3 generations of Asian American women. The actress who plays Andi Mack, Peyton Elizabeth Lee, is half Chinese on her father's side and also plays the titular character. Her mom, Bex on the show, portrayed by Lillian Bodwin, is half Taiwanese, and her grandmother Celia, portrayed by Lauren Tom, is Chinese American. And they do address that Andi Mack is half Chinese in the show, and the actress who plays her, again, is also half Chinese American, so the accuracy of the casting just really blew me away, especially since a lot of the times casting can really go sideways when it comes to Asian roles. For example, sometimes they just have open casting calls to anyone of Asian descent to play, you know, people from specific parts of Asia, Ryan the Last Dragon. But here they really took the time and effort to create an authentic story, and I think that's really amazing. I think it's overall awesome that the show exists and does a good job at not relying on stereotypes of the past to define Andi Mack. Rather, she can just be a regular kid with her friends navigating school life and trying to find her identity. According to NBC, the role was originally written for a white actor. Peyton Elizabeth Lee's performance convinced showrunners to cast a mixed-race Asian family. As Lillian Bodwin said to NBC, "I wonder if there are kids out there now, and I hope there are, saying, 'That's my family, that's my sister, that's my mother, that's me.'" According to Variety, the series ranks as the #1 show of 2017 to date amongst girls 6 to 11, girls 9 to 14, and girls 6 to 14, nearing 40 million views on 7 digital platforms, linear TV, and social media. It recently hit a ratings high on May 19th in total viewers, marking its 5th consecutive week of growth and a 34% ratings increase from its premiere telecast. Showing that authentically made shows starring Asian Americans as just regular people but who also have different and unique experiences to the white American experience are just as important and also have a huge audience waiting to eat them up. In an SNL skit from 6 years ago, they poke fun at how companies were afraid to make Asian American toys, but specifically Chinese American dolls, because they were afraid to try and for it to come off as offensive. And I think that honestly the same thing can be said with Disney Channel representation of Asian Americans and Chinese Americans specifically during that time of the early 2000s. Looking back at our timeline, we can see that aside from the Proud Family, which deserves a lot more credit in my opinion, the early 2000s and specifically the mid-2000s and the early 2010s was a mess when it came to Asian American representation on the channel. The characters were either too safe, didn't address race and took more of a colorblind approach, or addressed race and ethnicity almost to a parodic degree. With the more recent push towards better representation, starting around when The Nightmare That Is Jessie ended in 2015 and Andi Mack jumped on the scene in 2017, you can see how big of a difference in the case of representation was. Overall, I am optimistic that Disney Channel will do better because they see it as profitable rather than actually just a good thing to do. But I guess that's what we get in a capitalistic society. Anyway, as long as kids aren't bullied because of how their cultures are represented on Disney Channel, I'll be happy. I'll see you all in the next one, and thank you so much for watching, and a huge shout out to all of my patrons and members. And yeah, I'll see you all in the next one. Bye.